I've been working the night shift at the hospital for a few years now. It's usually quiet, almost too quiet. The halls are dimly lit, and the only sounds are the beeps of monitors and the occasional whisper of nurses. But last night, something happened that I can't shake off. Something that has me questioning my sanity. It started like any other night. I was assigned to the ICU where the sickest patients are kept. It was a small unit, just 6 rooms, all in a row. By 2 a.m., most of the patients were asleep, and I was doing my rounds, checking vitals and making sure everything was in order. That's when I first noticed him. He was standing at the end of the hallway, near the exit. At first, I thought he was a visitor who had gotten lost, but visiting hours were long over, and he wasn't wearing a visitor's badge. He was just standing there, staring at me. I called out to him, but he didn't respond. Instead, he turned and walked away, disappearing around the corner. I felt the chill run down my spine, but I shrugged it off. Maybe it was just some guy who wandered in from the street. It happens sometimes. I continued my rounds, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Around 3 a.m., I was in one of the patients' rooms, adjusting an IV drip, when I heard a noise outside. It was faint, like a soft scraping sound. I opened the door and peered down the hallway. It was empty. The sound stopped. I stepped out, looked around, but there was no one there. Just the flickering fluorescent lights and the hum of the air conditioning. As I turned to go back into the room, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. A shadow, moving quickly across the wall. I spun around, but again, there was nothing there. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could feel the sweat on my forehead. Something wasn't right. I decided to check the security cameras. We have a small office near the nurses' station with monitors that show different parts of the hospital. As I reviewed the footage, my hand started to shake. There he was, the man from earlier, standing in the hallway, staring directly into the camera. His face was pale, his eyes dark and hollow. He stood there for a few minutes, then moved out of frame. I fast-forwarded the footage, trying to see where he went, but it was like he vanished into thin air. I reported it to security, but they didn't take it seriously. They did a quick sweep of the area and found nothing. Probably just some homeless guy looking for a place to stay, they said. But I knew it was more than that. There was something off about him. Something sinister. By 4 a.m., I was a nervous wreck. I kept seeing shadows out of the corner of my eye, hearing faint whispers that I couldn't quite make out. I was in the break room, trying to calm myself down with a cup of coffee when the power went out. The room was plunged into darkness, and I heard that scraping sound again, closer this time. I fumbled for my cell phone flashlight, my hands trembling. When I finally got it on, I saw him standing in the doorway, just a few feet away. His face was twisted into a grotesque smile, his eyes boring into mine. I screamed and backed away, but he didn't move. He just stood there, watching me. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in fear. When the lights came back on, he was gone. I reported it again, but no one believed me. They said it was just my imagination, that I was overworked and stressed. But I know what I saw. I know he's out there, watching and waiting. And I have to go back tonight, back to those dark, silent halls where he's lurking. I don't know what he wants, but I'm terrified to find out. As I sit here writing this, the sun is setting. My shift starts in an hour. I can't shake the feeling that tonight, something terrible is going to happen. You ever been in one of those situations where you think, this can't be real, right? That was me last year during our school lockdown. It was supposed to be a regular Tuesday, but it turned into something out of a nightmare. It started in the cafeteria. It was lunchtime, and the room was full of the usual chaos. Kids chatting, the clattering of trays, and that weird smell of cafeteria food. I was sitting with my friends, just messing around and trying to avoid eating the mystery meat on my plate. Then, over the loudspeaker, a voice came through, shaky and tense.
Attention all students and staff. We are now in lockdown. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill.
At first, we didn't take it seriously. I mean, who does, right? We thought it was just another practice or someone playing a prank. But then, the doors to the cafeteria slammed shut, and Mr. Grayson, the janitor, bolted them from the outside. His face was pale, and he looked scared out of his mind. We all went quiet. The only sounds were the murmurs of confusion and the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights overhead. I remember looking at my friends and seeing the same fear in their eyes that I felt. Something was wrong. Really wrong. The teachers tried to keep us calm, but their voices were trembling. They herded us into the corner of the cafeteria away from the doors and windows. We all crouched down, trying to make ourselves as small as possible. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and fast, and the pounding of my heart in my ears. That's when we heard it, the sound of someone banging on the cafeteria doors. It was loud and frantic, like they were desperate to get in. The banging stopped, and for a moment there was silence. Then we heard a voice, a man's voice, angry and unhinged.
"Let me in. I know you're in there."
I almost lost it. It wasn't a voice I recognized. Whoever it was, they sounded dangerous. The teachers whispered for us to stay quiet, not to make a sound. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to will myself invisible. The voice got louder, more insistent.
"You can't hide from me. I'll find you."
Then came the sound of metal scraping against metal. I peeked through my fingers and saw the tip of a knife blade slipping through the crack between the doors. The man was trying to force his way in. One of the teachers, Mrs. Collins, pulled out her phone and dialed 911. Her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped it. She whispered into the phone, explaining the situation, her voice barely audible over the thudding of my heart. Minutes felt like hours. The knife blade disappeared and we heard footsteps moving away from the doors. But we knew he was still out there, somewhere in the school, looking for a way in. The air was thick with fear and I felt like I couldn't breathe. Suddenly, there was a loud crash from the direction of the kitchen. We all jumped, our eyes wide with terror. The man had found another way in. The teachers motioned for us to stay put, but I could see the panic in their eyes. They had no idea what to do. The sound of footsteps echoed through the cafeteria as the man moved closer. I could see his shadow on the wall, distorted and disturbing. He was muttering to himself, something about making them pay. My mind raced with questions. Who was he and what did he want? And why our school? Then he stepped into view. He was tall, with wild eyes and a crazed look on his face. His clothes were dirty and torn, and in his hand he clutched a large, gleaming Bowie knife. I felt a scream rising in my throat, but I forced it down, knowing that making any noise could get us killed. The man crept through the cafeteria, his eyes scanning the room. He seemed to know we were hiding somewhere, and he was determined to find us. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't see us. But then he stopped. His eyes locked onto our hiding spot, and a twisted smile spread across his face. He started walking toward us, his grip on the knife tightening. I felt a hand grab mine, squeezing it hard. It was my friend Jenna. Her eyes were wide with fear, and I could feel her trembling. Just when I thought it was all over, we heard the distant wail of sirens. The man froze, his head snapping toward the sound. The police were finally here. Relief flooded through me, but it was quickly replaced by a new wave of fear. The man looked enraged, like a cornered animal. He knew his time was running out, and he was getting desperate. He turned back to us, raising the knife.
"You're not getting away,"
he screamed, charging toward us. But before he could reach us, the cafeteria doors burst open and armed police officers stormed in, their weapons aimed at the man. "Drop the weapon," one of the officers shouted. The man hesitated for a moment, then let out a crazy scream and lunged at the officers. They fired, and the man dropped to the floor, the knife dropping out of his hand. Everything after that was a blur. The police rushed in, pulling us to safety, checking to make sure everyone was okay. I felt numb, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. We were all in shock, but we were alive. They took us out of the school, and I remember the sunlight feeling too bright, too real. Parents were waiting outside, their faces etched with worry. I saw my mom, and I ran to her, collapsing into her arms. I finally let the tears come, shaking with sobs as she held me tight. The man, we later found out, was a former student who had a grudge against the school and some students. He'd been planning the attack for weeks. It was a miracle no one was hurt, but the terror of that day stayed with us all. Even now, I sometimes wake up in a cold sweat, hearing his voice, seeing his crazed eyes. It was the scariest day of my life, and it's something I'll never forget. You know how they say you never really know someone until you live with them? I always thought it was just one of those things people say. I learned the hard way that it's not. I found my roommate Jake on one of those roommate matching apps. He seemed normal, good reviews, decent job, no weird habits according to his profile. He moved in and everything seemed fine at first. He was quiet, paid rent on time, and mostly kept to himself. We didn't hang out much, but that was okay with me. I liked my space. After a few weeks, though, I started noticing little things. It was nothing major at first, just oddities that I brushed off. Sometimes I'd come home and find my things slightly moved. My books wouldn't be in the exact spot I left them. My blankets would be folded differently. I figured Jake was just tidying up and didn't think much of it. One night, I was watching TV in the living room and Jake came in from work. He gave me a nod and went straight to his room, like always. But this time, I noticed he had a small bag with him, which he quickly hid under his jacket. I tried to tell myself I was being paranoid, that it was just something normal, but something felt off. A few days later, I was in the kitchen making dinner when Jake left his room to grab something. He was in a hurry and left his door slightly open. I couldn't help but glance inside. What I saw made my heart race. There was a small camera set up on a tripod, pointed directly at his bed. I tried to convince myself it was for something innocent, maybe he was into vlogging or something, but it felt wrong. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that camera. Why would he need it in his bedroom? Was he filming himself, or was he filming me? The next day, while Jake was at work, I decided to snoop. I know, it's wrong, but I had to know. I went into his room and checked the camera. My stomach dropped when I saw that the memory card was missing. It meant he was actively using it, taking it with him. I looked around his room more and found another camera, hidden in a pile of clothes, pointed towards the shared bathroom. I felt sick. My mind raced with all the possibilities. How long had this been going on? Had he been filming me this entire time? I decided to confront him. I couldn't live with someone who was secretly recording me, but when I tried to bring it up, he just smiled. A creepy, knowing smile. "What are you talking about?" he said, his voice eerily calm. "You must be imagining things." I wanted to scream, to get out of there, but something about his demeanor scared me. He was too calm, too confident. I started to feel trapped, like I was being stalked or something. That night, I packed a bag and decided to leave. I didn't care if I was overreacting. As I was getting ready to go, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from an unknown number. It was a video. My hand shook as I opened it. It was a video of me, sitting on my bed, reading a book. The camera angle was high from the corner of my room. My blood turned to ice. Jake had been recording me in my own room, my safe space. I turned to leave, but Jake was standing in the doorway, blocking my path. His smile was gone, replaced with a look of pure malice. "Going somewhere?" he asked, his voice dripping with menace. I don't remember much after that. I must have blacked out from fear. When I came to, I was in the living room, my bag still packed at my feet. Jake was gone, but the memory card from his camera was sitting on the coffee table. A note beside it read, "Watch this." I didn't. I couldn't. I grabbed my things and ran, not stopping until I was at a friend's place. I called the police, but by the time they got there, Jake had vanished. The cameras were gone, his room empty, like he had never been there. It's been months now, and I still can't shake that feeling of being watched. Every time I see a camera, or even a phone pointed in my direction, I freeze. I moved to a new place, got a new roommate, but I'm always on edge. You never really know someone until you live with them. I wish I had never met Jake. Sometimes someone can look great on paper, but once you actually live with them, it can be an entirely different story. I guess you could say I'm used to the creepy stuff. You have to be when you work the night shift at an old hospital like Providence Medical. But man, there was this one night that still gives me chills every time I think about it. It was around midnight, and the hospital was dead quiet, except for the occasional beeping of the heart monitors and the distant sound of the ambulance bay. I was stationed at the nurse's desk on the 4th floor. That's the old section of the hospital that they were planning to renovate but never got around to. The lights were always flickering, and half the rooms were empty, which just added to the creepy vibe. I was sipping my 3rd cup of coffee, trying to stay awake when the phone rang. It was the front desk saying that there was a call for me on line 2, which was odd because who would call me here in the middle of the night? I picked up. "Hello?" The line was filled with static at first. Then I heard a whisper. "Help me, please." The voice was so faint, I thought I was hearing things. "Who is this?" I asked. More static, and then the line went dead. I shook it off as a prank, but then the call came again. The same whisper, the same plea. I traced the call. It was coming from inside the hospital, from one of the old patient rooms on my floor. I grabbed my flashlight and keys, my heart pounding as I made my way down the dimly lit corridor. The air felt colder as I approached the room where the call had come from. The door creaked loudly as I pushed it open, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The room was empty, the bed neatly made, no sign of anyone having been there for years. I was about to leave when I heard a soft sobbing sound coming from the bathroom. As I slowly approached the bathroom door, the sobbing grew louder, more desperate. I called out, "Hello? Is anyone there? You don't need to be afraid." No response, just sobs. I pushed the door open and nothing. The room was completely empty. No one was there. The sobbing stopped. I felt a chill run down my back as I stood there, trying to make sense of it all. I hurried back to the nurse's desk, trying to calm my nerves. I sat down, my hand still shaking, when the phone rang again. It was the front desk. "Hey, just checking in. That call earlier, line 2, it's disconnected. Been out for weeks. Not sure how you got a call on that line." I couldn't even respond. My mind was racing. Disconnected? Then how? Just then, the lights flickered more violently and the hospital plunged into darkness. The emergency lights kicked in, casting eerie shadows along the walls. That's when I heard footsteps. Slow, dragging footsteps coming down the hallway towards me. I ducked under the desk, holding my breath. The footsteps stopped right in front of the nurse's desk. I could hear a raspy breathing just above me. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying that they'd go away. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps continued, fading away down the corridor. When the lights came back, I bolted out of there, ran all the way to the security office. I told them everything. They checked the cameras, but all they saw was me, running down the hallway, alone. They said it was probably just my imagination, working too many night shifts. But I know what I heard, I know what I felt, and I never volunteered for the night shift at Providence Medical again. It was just a regular Thursday, the kind where you drag yourself through the routine, counting down the minutes until the final bell. I was sitting in third period math class, doodling in my notebook and half listening to Mr. Johnson drone on about algebraic equations. Nothing out of the ordinary, just the usual hum of teenage chatter mixed with the occasional scraping of chairs and clicking of pens. But then the loudspeaker crackled to life. It was the principal's voice, but he sounded different, tense, and urgent.
Attention students and staff, this is a lockdown. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. Please follow lockdown procedures immediately.
My heart skipped a beat. We had lockdown drills before, but there was something in his voice that made the air feel thick and heavy. Mr. Johnson quickly locked the door and motioned for us to get under our desks. The room went silent, except for the sound of my own breathing, loud and ragged in my ears. We waited, but time seemed to stand still. My mind was racing. What was going on? Was it a shooter, a bomb threat? No one knew, and the not knowing was the worst part. Then we heard it, faint at first, but unmistakable. The sound of footsteps echoing through the empty hallways. Slow, deliberate steps. Someone was walking down the hall and they weren't in a hurry. I could see the fear in my classmates' eyes. Sarah, who sat next to me, was clutching her phone so tightly her knuckles were white. Jake, the class clown, wasn't smiling anymore. I tried to steady my breathing, but it felt like my chest was being squeezed in a vice. The footsteps got closer. They were right outside our door now. We all held our breath, praying that whoever it was would just keep walking. But they didn't. The doorknob rattled, and I thought I might pass out from the fear. Whoever was out there was trying to get in. Mr. Johnson motioned for us to stay quiet, but I could see the sweat on his forehead. The doorknob stopped rattling, and for a moment I thought maybe they'd moved on. But then came the knocking, soft at first, but growing louder, more insistent.
Let me in.
A voice called from the other side. It was low and calm, almost friendly, but there was something off about it.
I just want to talk.
No one moved. The knocking continued, relentless.
Come on, open up. I know you're in there.
My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I glanced at Sarah, who had tears streaming down her face. Jake was biting his lips so hard I thought he might draw blood. Suddenly, the knocking stopped. There was a long, eerie silence, and then we heard it, a scratching sound, like fingernails on a chalkboard. It was coming from the door, moving slowly, methodically.
Please,
the voice said again, softer now.
I just want to play.
The scratching continued, and I felt like I might scream. It went on for what felt like forever, and then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. We waited, the tension in the room so thick you could cut it with a knife. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we heard the footsteps again, moving away this time. We all let out the breath we didn't know we were holding. Mr. Johnson motioned for us to stay put, and we did, too afraid to move or speak. It felt like hours before the loudspeaker crackled again.
Attention students and staff, the lockdown is over. You may return to your normal activities.
Normal activities? How were we supposed to act normal after that? We slowly got up from our hiding spots, everyone looking shaken and pale. Mr. Johnson unlocked the door and we all filed out into the hallway, eyes darting around nervously. We never found out who it was or what they wanted. The police came and searched the school, but there was no sign of the person who had terrorized us. They said it was probably just a prank, but we all knew better. Something changed that day. The school didn't feel safe anymore. Every time I walked down those hallways, I could still hear the footsteps, the knocking, the scratching. And sometimes, late at night, when I'm lying in bed, I still hear that voice, whispering in the dark.
Let me in. I just want to play.
Alright, so this is gonna sound like some horror movie stuff, but I swear it's real. Like, it's happened to me and I need to get it off of my chest. So, I had this roommate, Tom. At first, he seemed pretty normal. A bit weird maybe, but who isn't these days, right? Little did I know, he was the kind of weird that sends shivers down your spine. I met Tom through a Craigslist ad for a roommate. I needed someone to help with rent and he needed a place to stay. Seemed like a win-win. He moved in and things were fine for a bit. He kept to himself mostly, which I didn't mind. But then little things started to seem off. Like I'd find him standing in the hallway, just staring at me. Not saying anything, just staring with this blank look on his face. It was creepy, but I figured maybe he was just socially awkward or something. One night I woke up to a noise, like someone was moving around in the kitchen. I figured it was Tom, maybe getting a midnight snack or something. But when I went to check, there was no one there. I shrugged it off, but then I noticed the back door was slightly open. I locked it and went to bed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The next day, Tom acted like nothing happened. I decided to bring it up casually like, "Hey man, were you in the kitchen last night?" He looked at me with those dead eyes and just said, "No." That was it. No explanation, nothing. I laughed it off, but inside I was a little freaked out. Things got worse from there. I started noticing stuff in my room moved around. Like my clothes would be in different places. My drawers would be open, and sometimes I'd find weird notes under my pillow. They didn't say anything threatening, just stuff like, "Nice shirt," or "You look tired today." It was like someone was watching me all the time. I knew it had to be Tom, but I was like way too scared to confront him about it. One night I came home late from work. I was exhausted and just wanted to crash. As I walked up to the house, I saw Tom standing in the window, staring out into the street. It was weird, but what freaked me out was that he was staring right at me. He didn't move, didn't blink, just watched me as I walked up to the door. When I got inside, he was gone, like completely vanished. I checked his room, the bathroom, everywhere. He wasn't there. I didn't see Tom for a few days after that. I thought maybe he'd moved out, but his stuff was still there. Then, one night, I was walking home and I had this feeling like someone was following me. You know that feeling when you can just sense someone's there? I turned around and there he was, standing a few feet behind me, just staring. No expression, no words, just standing there. I freaked out and started walking faster. I didn't want to run and make it obvious, but my heart was pounding. I finally got to the house, ran inside, and locked the door. I called a friend and told them everything. They said I should kick him out, but I was scared. What if he did something to me? The final straw was one night when I woke up to find Tom standing in my room. He was just standing at the foot of my bed, watching me. I screamed and he just walked out like it was nothing. That was it. I packed my stuff and left the next day. Didn't even say goodbye, just bailed. I moved in with a friend and blocked Tom on everything. I thought I was safe, but then I started getting these texts from unknown numbers. They were all just pictures of me, walking to work, at the grocery store, even inside my new place. No messages, just pictures. I knew it was him. He was still watching me, stalking me. I went to the police, but they couldn't do anything. No proof, they said. I changed my number and moved again. To this day, I still get a little freaked out whenever I get a picture or video message. It's like this paranoid feeling will never leave me or something. So yeah, that's my creepy roommate story. I don't know what he wanted or why he did it, but it still haunts me. I'm always looking over my shoulder, always scared he's gonna show up again. I just hope he never finds out where I am now. I never believed in ghosts, at least not until that night. It was my turn on the night shift at the hospital. I've done it dozens of times before. It's quiet, almost peaceful, but that night was different. The air felt heavier, colder. The light seemed dimmer. I shrugged it off as my imagination and got ready for my rounds. It was around 1:30 a.m. when it started. I was walking down the long, empty hallway on the 3rd floor, the floor that everyone said was haunted. I always dismissed it as hospital gossip. I always laughed it off, but as I walked, I heard a faint humming. It was soft, like a lullaby. I stopped and listened. The sound echoed through the hall, coming from an old storage room. I knew no one was supposed to be there. The room was used for old equipment and it was always locked. I hesitated but felt a strange pull to check it out. As I approached, the humming stopped. I reached for the doorknob, expecting it to be locked, but it turned easily in my hand. Inside the room was dark, the only light coming from a flickering bulb in the corner. The old hospital beds and wheelchairs cast long, eerie shadows on the walls. I scanned the room, but it was empty. Just as I turned to leave, the door slammed shut behind me. I froze. My heart pounded in my chest. I reached for the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. Then, the humming started again, louder this time, coming from right behind me. I spun around, but no one was there. A cold breeze brushed past me and I felt a presence. I couldn't see it, but I knew I wasn't alone. The humming grew louder, almost deafening, and I could feel something cold wrapping around my neck. I gasped for breath, my vision blurring. In the dim light, I saw a figure, a woman in an old-fashioned nurse's uniform, her face pale and eyes dark. She whispered something I couldn't understand, but the words gave me chills up and down my body. I struggled to free myself, but the cold grip tightened. Just as I felt myself slipping away, the door flew open and the grip released. I stumbled out, gasping for air, and the door slammed shut behind me. I ran down the hall, not daring to look back. When I reached the nurse's station, my colleagues saw the terror in my eyes. I tried to explain, but all I could say was, "The storage room, it's haunted." They looked at me with a mix of concern and disbelief. We went back to the storage room together, but it was empty. The door was locked, just as it should be. They told me it was just my imagination, the result of a long night and too little sleep. I know I'm not crazy. It was too real to not be real. I know I didn't imagine what happened, but I have no way of explaining it. The humming, the cold grip, the figure in the nurse's uniform, it was real. I never took the night shift again, and every time I pass that storage room, I get the creepiest feeling ever, reminding me that some things in this world are beyond explanation. I've tried to move on, to forget that night, but the memory lingers. A constant reminder of the darkness that lurks in the shadows. So if you ever find yourself working a night shift in a hospital and you hear a faint humming, beware. You might not be as alone as you think. You know those days when everything feels off right from the start? That was today. I woke up late, spilled coffee on my shirt, and missed the bus. By the time I got to school, I was already in a foul mood, and then it happened. It was during fourth period English class when the principal made an announcement over the intercom.
Attention all students and staff. We are now under lockdown. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. Please follow lockdown procedures immediately.
My heart skipped a beat. You hear about these things, but you never think it's going to happen at your school. Mrs. Green rushed to lock the door and turn off the lights, her face pale. We all ducked under our desks, the room suddenly feeling like a coffin. I don't know what possessed me to do it. Maybe it was the need to escape, maybe just plain bad luck, but I felt the sudden urge to use the bathroom. It was like I'd lost my mind or something. I got up and kinda ran to the door, unlocked it, and slipped out to go to the bathroom before anyone could say anything. My heart was pounding in my chest as I made my way down the hallway, crouching as I moved. The hallways were eerily silent, the kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. I reached the bathroom, pushed the door open, and slipped inside. The bathroom was empty, thank God. I went into the farthest stall and locked it, hoping this would be quick. But then I heard it. The bathroom door creaked open again, the sound echoing off the tiles. My breath hitched. I could hear someone's slow, deliberate footsteps.
Hello?
A voice called out, soft but chilling.
Is someone in here?
I didn't answer. I could see the shadow of feet under the stall door, moving slowly from one end of the bathroom to the other. My heart was in my throat. Whoever it was, they were looking for someone. I slowly and quietly peeked through a crack in the stall, and I saw him. Black combat boots, black pants, black hoodie. He was dressed in all black. My blood ran cold. He walked up to each stall, pushing each door open, each stall door slamming against the wall. I curled up on the toilet seat, trying to make myself as small as possible. The footsteps stopped outside my stall. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't see me. Then a big bang. My stall door shook but didn't open. I had locked it, and it was the only thing between me and whoever was out there.
I know you're in there.
He whispered in a quiet, creepy way.
Come out and play.
I stayed silent, my body trembling. He kicked the door, harder this time. The lock rattled, but it held.
Come on,
he said, his voice turning angry.
Don't make this hard.
I could hear him pacing outside the stall, muttering to himself, and then silence. I strained to hear any movement, but there was nothing. Maybe he had left. Maybe I was safe. I waited for what felt like forever, though it was probably only a few minutes. Slowly, I stood up and peeked through the small crack between the door and the stall. The bathroom seemed empty. I pushed the door open a fraction and then a bit more. The coast was clear. I let out a shaky breath and stepped out of the stall. That's when I saw it, in the mirror, behind me. The figure in black, standing perfectly still. I whipped around, but it was too late. He lunged at me, a flash of silver in his hand. I screamed, raising my arms to defend myself. The blade slashed my arm, pain exploding where it cut. I stumbled back into the stall, slamming the door shut and locking it again. I pressed my bleeding arm against my shirt, trying to stop the flow of blood. He pounded on the door, screaming in rage. I was trapped. Then the bathroom door burst open.
Police, drop the weapon.
A large amount of voices filled the bathroom. Then the man in black turned toward them, the police yelling commands. Shots rang out and he dropped to the floor, the knife clattering away. I stayed in the stall, too scared to move, until a police officer gently coaxed me out. They took me to the nurse's office where paramedics patched up my arm and the police asked a million questions. It was over. The lockdown ended and the psycho was caught. But the fear? That stayed with me. Even now, every time I walk past that bathroom, I get chills. I can still hear those footsteps, still feel that cold, creeping dread. School isn't supposed to be a place of terror, but that day, it was, and I'll never forget it. So, me and my two roommates, Max and Sam, were living in this old, kinda beat up house just off campus. Max was cool, we clicked right away. But Sam? Man, Sam was another story. Dude was super weird from day one. But we needed a third person to help with the rent, so we didn't really have a choice. Sam moved in with all these boxes, but he never really unpacked. His room always looked like he was ready to leave at any moment. And he was quiet, like super quiet. He'd just sit in his room for hours, barely making a sound. But that wasn't even the weirdest part. At night, he'd hum. This creepy, low hum that you could barely hear through the walls. It gave me chills. One night, Max and I were chilling in the living room, playing video games, when we heard it. It was a thumping noise, like someone was dropping heavy books on the floor. We paused the game and listened. It was coming from Sam's room. Max shrugged it off, but I was already getting bad vibes. A few days later, I started noticing things. Little things. Stuff would go missing, my phone charger, a couple of my shirts, even some food from the fridge. I asked Max, but he was just as confused as I was. We decided to talk to Sam. When we knocked on Sam's door, he didn't answer. Max, being Max, just opened the door, and there was Sam sitting on his bed, staring at the wall. His room was dark except for a single candle on the floor, and the walls covered in weird symbols drawn in what looked like red paint, or at least I hoped it was paint. "Hey Sam, what's up with the walls?" Max asked, trying to keep it casual. Sam turned his head slowly, like he was in some kind of trance. "Protection," he said. His voice was flat, emotionless. "Protection from what?" I asked, feeling more creeped out by the second. "The shadows," Sam whispered. "They're always watching." Max and I exchanged looks, not sure how to respond. We backed out of his room and closed the door, both of us feeling uneasy. That night, the humming was louder, and there were other noises too. Scratching sounds like something was clawing at the walls. I barely slept, and when I did, I had the worst nightmares. Dark figures standing at the foot of my bed, watching me with glowing eyes. The next morning, I told Max about it. He said he heard the noises too and was starting to get freaked out. We decided to confront Sam again, but when we went to his room, he was gone. His boxes, his weird symbols, everything was just gone. We didn't even hear him leave. Days turned into weeks and the house got creepier. The noises at night got worse. The shadows on the wall seemed to move on their own. One night, I woke up to find my door open and a dark figure standing in the doorway. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. It just stood there, watching me. When I finally blinked, it was gone. Max and I were losing it. We started sleeping in the living room with the lights on, just trying to make it through the night. One night, we heard a knock on the front door. It was Sam. His eyes were wide and he looked terrified. "They're coming," he whispered. I couldn't stop them. Before we could ask what he meant, he turned and ran into the darkness. We never saw him again. The house got worse after that. Max and I decided to leave. We packed up and moved out as fast as we could, but the nightmares never stopped. I still see those dark figures in my dreams, and I swear sometimes I hear that humming. Living with Sam was the scariest thing I've ever been through. Even now, thinking about it gives me chills. If you ever get a weird roommate, trust your gut. Don't stick around to find out what they're hiding.